There is nothing my holiness cannot do. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. There is nothing your holiness cannot do. There is nothing our holiness cannot do. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. There is nothing. There is absolutely nothing my holiness cannot do. Thank you all so much for joining me. I'm a forgiveness teacher from the Ozarks, Miracle Willie, and we're ready for lesson 38 in A Course in Miracles workbook for students from Foundation for Inner Peace publication here on Wednesday, February the 7th of 2023. My holiness is my salvation. And you know, I think of holiness, the word, kind of like I think of the word meditation. Not that they mean the same thing, but that it's hard to get a definition for the word meditation, at least in the higher types of meditation. You know, some of the practice periods we do, it's real obvious what we're doing, but there's a more subtle realm that we're getting to that is not definable by words in this world, really. And so kind of coming into it with an open mind, the same thing for holiness. You know, I think of it as wholeness, but that's not a complete definition. You could think of it as consecrated to God, but that's everything. You could think of it as purity, but that also should be everything. Sinlessness, there's a lot of words, but we'll learn more about it as we experience the word I'm trying to say. My holiness is my salvation. That's tomorrow's. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. Wind blew it. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. But we're going to read that after we finish our text reading. So let's go look at our text first. And we're in chapter 5. And it's the ego's use of guilt. Chapter 5, Healing and Wholeness, Roman numeral 5, the ego's use of guilt. Perhaps some of our concepts will become clearer and more personally meaningful if the ego's use of guilt is clarified. The ego has a purpose just as the Holy Spirit has. The ego's purpose is fear, because only the fearful can be egotistic. The ego's logic is as impeccable as that of the Holy Spirit, because your mind has the means at its disposal to side with heaven or earth, as it elects. But again, remember that both are in you. In heaven there is no guilt, because the kingdom is attained through the atonement, which releases you to create. The word create is appropriate here because once what you have made is undone by the Holy Spirit, the blessed residue is restored and therefore continues in creation. That little nugget of truth that's in every experience, little yin in every yang, every little yang in every yin. There's always the truth in everything. The love is what inspires all life. So even though it gets filtered through our belief systems, the Holy Spirit's job is to bring back the reality of what was there and what is always there, the love. The blessed residue, he calls it. Let me read that sentence again. The word create is appropriate here. Oh, and let's go back one more. In heaven there is no guilt because the kingdom is attained through the atonement which releases you to create. The word create is appropriate here because once what you have made is undone by the Holy Spirit, the blessed residue is restored and therefore continues in creation. What is truly blessed is incapable of giving rise to guilt and must give rise to joy. This makes it invulnerable to the ego because its peace is unassailable. It is invulnerable to disruption because it is whole. Guilt is always disruptive. Anything that engenders fear is divisive because it obeys the law of division. If the ego is the symbol of the separation, it is also the symbol of guilt. Guilt is more than merely not of God. It is the symbol of attack on God. This is a totally meaningless concept, except to the ego. But do not underestimate the power of the ego's belief in it. This is the belief from which all guilt really stems. The ego is the part of the mind that believes in division. How could part of God detach itself without believing it is attacking him? We spoke before of the authority problem as based on the concept of usurping God's power. The ego believes that this is what you did because it believes that it is you. If you identify with the ego, you must perceive yourself as guilty. Whenever you respond to your ego, you will experience guilt and you will fear punishment. The ego is quite literally a fearful thought. However ridiculous the idea of attacking God may be to the sane mind, never forget that the ego is not sane. It represents a delusional system and speaks for it. Listening to the ego's voice means that you believe it is possible to attack God and that a part of him has been torn away by you. Fear of retaliation from without follows, because the severity of the guilt is so acute that it must be projected. You feel so bad inside, you've got to blame somebody to try to get rid of it. That's that type of projection, which we're learning to undo and see that I am that. You know, you're everything that you look at, so you can't really know where to throw it, really. You can let it go, though. Let go and let God. Whatever you accept into your mind has reality for you. It is your acceptance of it that makes it real. If you enthrone the ego in your mind, your allowing it to enter makes it your reality. This is because the mind is capable of creating reality or making illusions. I said before that you must learn to think with God. To think with him is to think like him. This engenders joy, not guilt, because it is natural. Guilt is a sure sign that your thinking is unnatural. Wow. Unnatural thinking will always be attended with guilt because it is the belief in sin. The ego does not perceive sin as a lack of love, but as a positive act of assault. This is necessary to the ego's survival because as soon as you regard sin as a lack, you will automatically attempt to remedy the situation, and you will succeed. The ego regards this as doom, but you must learn to regard it as sin, or as freedom, excuse me. The ego regards this as doom for you to see sin as lack, but you must learn to regard seeing sin as lack as freedom. The guiltless mind cannot suffer. Being sane, the mind heals the body because it has been healed. The guiltless mind cannot suffer. Being sane, the mind heals the body because it has been healed. The sane mind cannot conceive of illness because it cannot conceive of attacking anyone or anything. Have you reached that place where you don't even think about wanting ever to attack anyone, to justify the situation, to get what you want? The sane mind cannot conceive of illness because it cannot conceive of attack or attacking anyone or anything. I love this saying where it says, being sane, the mind heals the body because it has been healed. Talking about how that once the mind's healed, the body heals automatically. So let's read this again. The guiltless mind cannot suffer. Being sane, the mind heals the body because it has been healed. We're just turning to what's natural, not having guilt, not having attack thoughts. The sane mind cannot conceive of illness because it cannot conceive of attacking anyone or anything. I said before that illness is a form of magic. It might be better to say that it is a form of magical solution. The ego believes that by punishing itself it will mitigate the punishment of God. Yet even in this it is arrogant. It attributes to God a punishing intent, and then takes this intent as its own prerogative. It tries to usurp all the functions of God as it perceives them, because it recognizes that only total allegiance can be trusted. 6. The ego cannot oppose the laws of God any more than you can, but it can interrupt them according to what it wants, just as you can. That is why the question, what do you want, must be answered. What do you want? What do you really want? He says we've got to learn to ask that question in every situation. You are answering it every minute and every second, and each moment of decision is a judgment that is anything but ineffectual. Every decision you make has an effect. It's making the whole world you see. Its effects will follow automatically until the decision is changed. Remember, though, that the alternatives themselves are unalterable. The Holy Spirit, like the ego, is a decision. Together they constitute all the alternatives the mind can accept and obey. The Holy Spirit and the ego are the only choices open to you. God created one, and so you cannot eradicate it. You made the other, and so you can. Only what God creates is irreversible and unchangeable. What you made can always be changed, because when you do not think like God, you're not really thinking at all. Delusional ideas are not real thoughts, although you can believe in them, but you are wrong. The function of thought comes from God and is in God. As part of His thought, you cannot think apart from Him. Again, on those two sentences, the function of thought comes from God and is in God. As part of His thought, you, being part of His thought, you cannot think apart from Him. That's what's natural. But when you pick up guilt thoughts, separation thoughts, attack thoughts, sin thoughts, you're doing what's unnatural or irrational. Irrational thought is disordered thought. God Himself orders your thoughts because your thought was created by Him. Guilt feelings are always a sign that you do not know this. Again on that, irrational thought is disordered thought. God Himself orders your thought because your thought was created by Him. Guilt feelings are always a sign that you do not know this. They also show that you believe that you can think apart from God and want to. Every disordered thought is attended by guilt at its inception and maintained by guilt in its continuance. Guilt is inescapable by those who believe they order their own thoughts and must therefore obey their dictates. This makes them feel responsible for their errors without recognizing that by accepting this responsibility, they are reacting irresponsibly. If the sole responsibility of the miracle worker is to accept the atonement for himself, and I assure you that it is, then the responsibility for what is atoned for cannot be yours. The dilemma cannot be resolved except by accepting the solution of undoing. You would be responsible for the effects of all your wrong thinking if it could not be undone. The purpose of the atonement is to save the past in purified form only. If you accept the remedy for disordered thought, a remedy whose efficacy is beyond doubt, can its symptoms remain? Let's look at that again since it took so long for me to turn my page there. The purpose of atonement is to save the past in purified form only. So everything that's ever happened in the past, there's that nugget, that blessed residue that's love, that's good. Everything has something good about it. You might think of yourself as an eternal optimist. That's what I'm kind of thinking as I look at being a Course in Miracles student. I mean, we got God on our side. Everything always works out. You might as well live in that way. Kind of like that. I was going to say kind of like that Pollyanna. The purpose of the atonement is to save the past in purified form only. If you accept the remedy for disordered thought, a remedy whose efficacy is beyond doubt, how can its symptoms remain? In the last paragraph 8, the continuing decision to remain separated is the only possible reason for continuing guilt feelings. We've said this before, but did not emphasize the destructive results of the decision. Any decision of the mind will affect both behavior and experience. What you want, you expect. This is not delusional. Your mind does make your future, and it will turn it back to full creation at any minute if it accepts the atonement first. It will also return to full creation the instant it has done so, accepted the atonement. Having given up its disordered thought, the proper ordering of thought becomes quite apparent. Let go of what's unreal, and the real just comes of itself. Okay, well now before we read our lesson 38, there is nothing my holiness cannot do. Let's take a moment and see what's going on around the world. In holidays and observances, they say it's Ballet Day, E-Day, Global School Play Day, Harry Potter Book Night, International Clash Day, International Black HIV AIDS Awareness Day, National Fettuccine Alfredo Day, National Girls and Women in Sports Day, National Periodic Table Day, National Signing Day, and I think that the word for peace in sign language is and then down. So I think it's and hands to your side. I think that's the word for peace. That's what we'll use today anyway. So we're going to use it. So peace be with you. Have serenity. Rose Day. Send a card to a friend Day. Wave all your fingers at your neighbor today. And World Read Aloud Day. Of course, we're reading aloud, aren't we? Reading what Jesus wrote in Course in Miracles. Okay, and in the edible landscaping, there's the, let's see if I can pronounce this properly. I wrote the pronunciation. Let's see if I can say it. It's Ochlockonee blueberry. Field observations indicate Ochlockonee is more resistant to bacterial canker than other rabbit eyes. Plants are vigorous and upright, produces abundant fruiting stems annually with only moderate growth. Berries ripen about 1 week after Tiff blue and are larger. Color, firmness, and flavor are similar to Tiff blue and powder blue. Ochlockonee generally flowers late enough to escape spring freezes in south and middle Georgia. Estimated chill requirement of the variety is 650 to 700 hours, good in zone 7 through 10. So that's kind of a warm season blueberry. Probably wouldn't do real good in my part of the Ozarks. And I'm having a conversation with Jessica, my girlfriend, about fleas and tick repellent, and I found here's some things that tend to repel ticks that I've been learning about. Citronella oil, cinnamon oil, garlic oil, lemongrass, thyme, lavender, rosemary, cedarwood, neem, and clove. Some of those smell really good and they actually kill the ticks or fleas. Others just repel them. So, and they say mix them all with a carrier oil like, olive oil or something. Anyway, I found all that I found most of that on everlastingcomfort.net. So anyway, the reason I wanted to tell you that is because we've been having kind of a lively conversation about, how to keep the fleas off of our cat. And I'm looking for some natural remedy, and we just want to make sure that it repels them. And so we've been having some conversation about it. And so I used that in my lesson today. I'll let you know here in a minute when we get to that point. Permaculture for Beginners by Carrie Mitchell. Climate and regional considerations. She talks about microclimates, a small location that has a unique temperature variable as a result of topography, water bodies, and materials such as homes and plants. You can consciously make these little microclimates or these niches, like using rocks to draw in heat, or by plants and trees, large objects to create shade. Anyway, Okay, now let's go take a look at our my holiness is my salvation. If guilt is hell, what is its... I did that again, changed my page. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. Your holiness reverses all the laws of the world. It is beyond every restriction of time, space, distance, and limits of any kind. Your holiness is totally unlimited in its power because it establishes you as a son of God, at one with the mind of his Creator. Through your holiness, the power of God is made manifest. Through your holiness, the power of God is made available. And there is nothing the power of God cannot do. Your holiness, then, can remove all pain, can end all sorrow, and can solve all problems. It can do so in connection with yourself and with anyone else. It is equal in its power to help anyone because it is equal in its power to save anyone. If you are holy, so is everything God created. You are holy because all things he created are holy, and all things he created are holy because you are. If you are holy, so is everything God created. You are holy because all things he created are holy, and all things he created are holy because you are. In today's exercises, we will apply the power of your holiness to all problems, difficulties, or sufferings in any form that you happen to think of, in yourself or in someone else. He will make no distinctions because there are no distinctions. So problems, difficulties, and sufferings. We can, how does he say that? We can apply the power of your holiness. You can be applied to all your problems, all your difficulties, and all your suffering in any form that you happen to think of in yourself or in someone else. We will make no distinction because there are no distinctions. In the 4 longer practice periods, each preferably to last a full 5 minutes, repeat the idea for today. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. Then close your eyes, and then search your mind for any sense of loss or unhappiness of any kind as you see it. Try to make as little distinction as possible between a situation that is difficult for you and one that is difficult for someone else. Identify the situation specifically and also the name of the person concerned. Use this form in applying the idea for today. In the situation involving, like let's use my example that Jessica and I have been talking about. So in the situation involving flea repellent, in which I see myself, there is nothing my holiness cannot do. In the situation involving flea repellent, in which Jessica sees herself, there is nothing my holiness cannot do. You see how you could actually use that with something that two people are trying to come to an understanding on? You could use it in that way, particularly if it's a kind of a heated discussion. But any kind of talk, if you're just trying to come up with a solution to a problem or to difficulties or suffering. From time to time, you may want to vary this procedure and add some relevant thoughts of your own. You might like, for example, to include thoughts such as, there is nothing my holiness cannot do because the power of God lies in it. Introduce whatever variations appeal to you, but keep the exercises focused on the theme, there is nothing my holiness cannot do. The purpose of today's exercises is to begin to instill in you a sense that you have dominion over all things because of what you are. In the frequent shorter applications, apply the idea in its original form unless a specific problem concerning you or someone else arises or comes to mind. In that event, use the more specific form in applying the idea. Okay, so in the event that someone actually is causing you some trouble, then use the longer form, which is, there is nothing my holiness cannot do, involving whatever the problem is, and in which whoever it is sees him or herself. Okay, and let's remember our word for peace. You can put your hands down to your side to end. Okay, well, let's sing our song and go about our Father's business. being the natural love that we are. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. And I'll hear this, and we'll do this in just a minute. If we did the one using my example, in the situation involving flea repellent, in which I see myself, or there is nothing my holiness cannot do. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. In the situation involving flea repellent, in which Jessica sees herself, there is nothing my holiness cannot do. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. Now let's do it. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. Now I'll just hum the blank. There is a in the situation involving, in which I see myself, in the situation involving, in which I see myself, there is nothing my holiness cannot do. In the situation involving, in which sees herself or himself, there is nothing my holiness cannot do. And then you can add some thoughts. There is nothing my holiness cannot do, because the power of God lies in it. There is nothing my holiness cannot do, because it is the most natural thing in all the world. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. Now you all do it. Now one more time. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. In the situation involving, in which I see myself, there is nothing my holiness cannot do. In the situation involving, in which sees him or herself, there is nothing my holiness cannot do. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. And our word for peace is silent. There is nothing my holiness cannot do.